this episode, Jeff Palmucci from TripAdvisor talks about his journey to create machine learning group. So stay tuned. So welcome everyone to another episode of Future of Data podcast. Today we have Jeff Palmucci from TripAdvisor. A quick bio on Jeff. As a serial entrepreneur, Jeff has started several companies. He was VP of software development at Optimex Systems, a developer of scheduling systems for manufacturing operations acquired by i2 Technologies. As a founder and CTO of programmatic hedge fund Percipio Capital Management, he helped lead the company to acquisition by Link Ventures. Jeff is currently leading the machine learning group at TripAdvisor, which does various machine learning projects across the company, including natural language processing, review fraud detection, personalizations, information retrieval, and machine vision. Jeff has publications in natural language processing, machine learning, genetic algorithm, expert systems, and programmatic language. When Jeff is not writing code, he enjoys going to innumerable rock concerts as a professional photographer. So, and Jeff, love to have the link of your artwork so we can post it on our podcast as well. So that's definitely good to see whenever you see a kind of a data nerd with creative edge. That's fascinating.
I think that photography is kind of the ideal hobby for a nerd because of all the hardware involved.
Well said. So Jeff, thank you so much again for jumping quickly on the thought of sharing your knowledge and your experience with our community of data science professionals via Future of Data. So thank you. Welcome on board.
Great to be here.
Beautiful. So why don't we talk about, so when I was reading your bio and when I was looking at your LinkedIn, I said, wow, like you have done a lot. You have been around the block a lot. So why don't you sort of walk us through your professional journey to this point, so we know where you're coming from, and feel free to pitch in the photography as well.
I want to thank you for pointing out how old I am. Thank you very much for that. Well, like I said, I've been around for quite a while. Actually, I started with artificial intelligence and machine learning actually in college at MIT at then the Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, working on natural language processing. Left there, got a job at Bolt Brannick & Newman in the government labs section. And worked on a whole bunch of different projects. That was a great project. That was a great place to do research. Natural language processing, speech recognition, machine vision, scheduling. The research in scheduling, it was a genetic algorithm-based algorithm that we were working with, showed some promise, and we spun that out from BBN into my first startup, which was Optimex Systems, which was a scheduling company. We scheduled manufacturing floors. Our first customer was John Deere planters. And I don't know if you know what a planter is, but it's basically that big thing that you tow behind a tractor in order to stick seeds into the ground.
Yeah.
They had a pretty great internal research organization, and we were able to contact them and work out our first project together. And when that scheduling system went in the planters factory, we increased throughput by 15% just through software, right? So
wow.
A pretty big boost. And the software was also very good at highlighting the constraints of the organization. So, it worked out to be a pretty good communication tool for different people that were managing different parts of the shop floor, and they were able to collaborate there using the software and increase throughput by 45% in the end using our software. And then we just rolled through all of a big portion of John Deere because we had good word of mouth, and then Case, and then Volvo Trucks, and then GM. And we were finally acquired 4 years later by i2 Technologies, who was more of on the planning side of manufacturing operations. And they were trying to get into the scheduling side, and we kept on doing well against them in competitive bids. So they acquired us, and worked there for several years. The interesting thing about scheduling problems is that they're all slightly different, right? So you can it's always a semi-custom operation where you go into different manufacturing floors and learn about new constraints that they have and how things are produced. It was actually, quite an interesting experience. I mean, I've been everywhere from toenail clipper factories to foundries, pouring big hunks of metal. Quite an interesting stint there. After a couple of years there, I left and started doing some research into some machine vision back when it didn't really work very well. And after a couple of years of that, me and my old partner from Optimax Systems started a new company called Percipio, called Machine Insight, which then morphed into Percipio Capital, which was a programmatic trading fund. We had a machine learning technique that was very good at inducing rules over very high dimensional data, and made a go at that. The company was doing okay, but then March of 2009 happened, and nobody could raise any money ever because everybody was just like ducking and covering. Right. Nobody could raise any money, so we pivoted. I left shortly after that, but the company went on to become Jobcase, which is actually doing quite well these days. Then I went back to MIT at the computer science lab to do research into question answering systems with my old group there, and work on a couple of other startups. So sold 2 of them, started a lot more of them. Nobody's perfect. But after a little bit, I started looking around for a job, and the TripAdvisor opportunity came up. At that point, they didn't have a machine learning group, and I was able to. They hired me, and I was able to go around the company and find some good applications for machine learning, and they basically said hire a group, and then here we are.
Nice. Yeah. That's. We'll resume after a short break. This part of the podcast is brought to you by First Friday Fair, fastest AI-powered way to find your next opportunity. Check out the website firstfridayfair.tao.ai and find your next dream job. Let's get back to the podcast. Fascinating. So I think one thing that I hear a lot, and even from my own experience, tad bit, that people who are from machine learning domain in 90s, like early to late 90s or late 80s, they used to call it machine learning. So it was neural net or whatever, right? It was like AI winter for most of people there, right? So it doesn't work. It's just like it's crappy. It's you can't really rely anything on it. What's your experience from that era to this era? What are some of your thoughts?
It's quite simple. Back then, it really didn't work that well. So I mean, back then everything was symbolic rule processing. Expert systems. You had some very useful rule systems, like the constraint engines were very useful in keeping track of a bunch of different things that humans couldn't. But then you had expert systems, which are basically rule systems that were trying to emulate users' behavior, and they just didn't really work that well. AI started to work years later when everybody started going statistical, right? So statistical inference, making decisions based on data as opposed to human coded rules. That's when it really started to kick off. And even today at TripAdvisor, we could. We could basically afford to use any kind of algorithms we want, but a lot of times the best algorithms are not that complicated, right? We do a lot of logistic regression at TripAdvisor. A lot of other very simple techniques. We do deep learning for machine vision and stuff like that. But you know, the algorithms, once you get past a critical point of you know, getting that certain amount of data that you need to train the things, and we've got tons of data, then it's pretty straightforward.
Right. No, I think that's well said. And I think one thing that really fascinated me about your profile, Jeff, is that your entrepreneurial background in machine learning and machine vision and all that, right? So, so what has been your experience running a startup with this futuristic ideas? Like, what are some of the challenges that you saw? If you can shed some light, and what are some of the opportunities that you were really able to leverage onto, or like what are some of the thoughts there?
Yeah, well, the first startup, the Optimax, was very focused on finding. So we had this great optimization technology, did very well with combinatorial problems. That's, you know, problems that fit together like puzzle pieces, as opposed to something that you could, you know, hill climb to with gradient descent or something like that. And you know, we were pretty lucky in that we were able to find a group in industry that had a very good use case for that, and we kind of built out the software, interacting with people in industry in order to build the functionality that was ultimately required. Right. So first thing, you know, our customers in that particular case really informed us on what was needed and what kind of software was required. So, you know, when you're that particular company was a constant learning process, especially because, like I said before, mostly every scheduling problem in manufacturing is slightly different. Yeah. So being, you know, having a great technology is only the first step. You've got to look around and make sure that you're building it for a problem that really exists. You know, and once you do that, right? So when we went and put the system in planters and they got that huge boost in throughput, then sales becomes easy. So if you can prove your value to the customers, and that's basically how the companies that I've started, you know, have been operating, right? You know, I wouldn't consider myself a marketing genius by any stretch of the imagination, but we've been able, in a couple of cases that I talked about, to go in and identify a problem and prove to the customers that we have the solution, and then sales becomes a lot easier.
We'll resume after a short break. This part of the podcast is brought to you by First Friday Fair, fastest AI-powered way to find your next opportunity. Check out the website firstfridayfair.tao.ai and find your next dream job. Let's get back to the podcast. So for any entrepreneur who's grinding their teeth in selling a machine learning solution, because I think we talk to a lot of interesting use cases nowadays. I think it's fascinating to see what all current entrepreneurs are thinking and what are areas but it's like it's majorly designed by a nerd thinking, right? So a nerd thinker are, hey, let me just code the heck out of this thing, and let me not worry about the market. And then once I hit it, everyone, yeah.
So at this point in my career, I'm at the other side of the buy-sell decision, right? I'm looking, you know, so I'm a TripAdvisor, and we'll go ahead and buy something if it solves a problem that we're trying to do, as opposed to build it ourselves. You know, but we do that based on KPIs, right? We do that based on how is this particular technology going to save us money or make us money, and how can we prove it, right?
Interesting. So let's I think so. One thing that I hear a lot from very early entrepreneurs working on machine learning solution is their struggle to convince a client that, like, I call it, pardon my French, who the hell are you syndrome, right? So what are some of your suggestions on those entrepreneurs, how they can build their credibility in the market, or at least convince a business? What are some of your key thoughts that comes to your mind that, hey, like do these 3 or 4 critical steps to at least solve that tipping point of recognition that, okay, you exist and your problem is existing, and these guys can solve it?
Right. It's not an easy thing to do. I mean, that's one of the hardest things in a startup, is actually to get those first couple of jobs to try and prove your worth to somebody, right? In both cases, in my startups, at least the successful ones, we were able to prove to our first customers, and our first customers were able to take a leap just based on that, based on like benchmarking problems, right? So here's a technology, here's how it solves this particular problem. We think that you have a problem that it applies to. Let's go ahead and try to build a solution, right? And you don't have a lot of pricing pressure in that first solution. But if you have forward-thinking people in industry, and a lot of times you do, which is a good thing, you can get that first job done, and then increase your leverage for pricing a little bit later on down the road.
Well said. And I think one more thing that I definitely want your opinion on is, so you said you came to TripAdvisor for creating machine learning group, and this is like even replicating that to your past entrepreneurial background. How do you decide like who to hire? So when you're put up in this situation of, hey, you have a grand vision, or you have some thinking, some basic ideology, and so how do you go about that?
So first of all, we're not the only group at TripAdvisor that does machine learning. Before I came there, there was a group called the Data Science Group. They concentrate mostly on the marketing side of things, and my group concentrates more on the content side of things. But they did actually have a large group there before doing this kind of stuff. What I look for when I try to hire somebody is somebody that has a broad experience in a bunch of different areas, right? So you could have a PhD in a particular specialty of machine learning and know it cold, and are able to come up with a great new algorithm that on a certain problem optimizes it to 1% better accuracy, and that's not really as useful as having a broad experience and knowing when to apply different techniques to different problems. So typically during my interview process, I will talk about the background of the applicants, and then go into a bunch of different use cases. How would you solve this particular problem? How would you solve this particular problem? And judge, whether I think their approaches, that they're just, I'm expecting for a V1. I'm not expecting somebody to come up with the ultimate solution at the end. But do they know where to start looking? Do they have a broad enough experience that they'll be going in the right direction when they kick off on this job? And one of the great things about working at a company like TripAdvisor or any large information-based company is that you're exposed to a ton of different problems, right? So you have plenty of ideas to run by a particular applicant to see what they would do. So broad experience. I also look for at least some coding experience, even for the strict data scientists, because knowing a lot about data is not really useful unless you know how to extract it from a computer. So there's that kind of thing. And then those are the main features, I think. A broad exposure to different algorithms and the capability to use them. And to the second point, we also do a homework problem that is a real machine learning problem that we got using data off the site, and actually look and see how they solve it, right? So are you able to actually take the knowledge that you learned in school, if you're out of school, and apply it in practice? Are you able to come up with an answer that's competitive with what other people have done?
We'll resume after a short break. This part of the podcast is brought to you by First Friday Fair, fastest AI-powered way to find your next opportunity. Check out the website firstfridayfair.tao.ai and find your next dream job. Let's get back to the podcast. Interesting. So I think you raised a very interesting point about TripAdvisor being in for edge, and I think this is we see from Analytics Week this problem a lot as well. So when you have a lot of data or community size or whatever, right? So you are always thrown with multiple random problems, right? So hey, focus on this, and you can go in like 1700 directions that sounds and very critical on the paper. How do you maintain a focus of what to attack, like top? Because you can't do everything, right? And it's very easy to kill yourself in deluge.
There's no one answer to that, right? So every domain is different. And what you need to do is you need to work with product and business people to identify what kind of performance indicators you're looking at moving, and then use your best judgment on where to attack first. I mean, there's especially in a company as big as TripAdvisor, there's always going to be opportunities to apply machine learning in a bunch of different areas. And you have to take a look at what people are doing now. How good is your data? How is your training data? And what kind of lift do you think you can get by doing better predictions, right? And it's so KPIs, key performance indicators, are not a machine learning based thing, right? But they're extremely useful for machine learning because it's all about measurement, right? You need to find out what needle you want to move, and then you attack it, right? And it's a lot of guesswork sometimes in terms of where you think the most profitable project is at any particular point in time. But that's why you get the big bucks to do that guesswork.
I agree, and I think, and one thing again that I really love about you is, so you represent a perfect use case of why this podcast exists to begin with. So basically, to give you a background, so a lot of people approach us saying, hey, I've been given, my company is telling me to start thinking in the direction of big data science, machine learning. I have no clue what I'm talking about. TripAdvisor is lucky to have you because you have an entrepreneurial background. You have done this multiple times. You can do that. But most of sort of executives who are actually getting into this ranks of, hey, put up a group, put up a test. Either you call it a lab framework where you are trying to quantify innovation that some companies are doing, or whether you call about, say, find interesting use cases that businesses could run for. Like, what are some of your thoughts or some of your hacks that you want to share to someone who is not from the entrepreneurial background, who is very corporate and very cultural depth in an organization, working on this problem of, hey, let's put together a group, and I understand that this is not the first group and it's just a follow-up group, but what are some of your thoughts that when you come on this, like, what are 3 to 4 things that you should keep an eye on?
I don't think it's a good idea to put together a group without any kind of charter, right? So what I did when I was first hired by TripAdvisor is spent a good month, running around the company and identifying what the first projects for this group would be, right? Nice. And actually coming up with a document that that's kind of a plan on what we should be doing, where we could move the needle. And it was really great of the TripAdvisor management to allow me to do that. I mean, this was kind of a flyer on their part to see if there was some stuff out there that this technology was applicable to. So we came back with a list of projects, and that's when we started thinking about a group. I mean, we didn't start thinking about the group the first day that I started at TripAdvisor. But after we identified that plan of a little bit of runway on where on what we could do, that's when we started partnering up.
Interesting, and I think and to sort of segue into my previous question. So the other area that we see some of the like up and coming leaders struggle is convincing the company of the culture. So I remember talking to one of the BlackBerry product managers a while back, And he said, man, we were hitting all of our KPIs, right? It's not my fault. Like I exactly know what to tap for, and even today I'm getting progress. It's just what if the KPI relevance changed from the market landscape, right? So why am I the problem in that, right? Why? So now, and he said, I've been telling with this company for blah blah blah, and you hear about a lot of these smart folks trying to raise an alarm for companies saying, hey, put something like this together, but the culture is not ready for it yet, right? So there's no sponsor, whatever. So what are some of your suggestions in that area?
Well, I mean, you don't have to start huge, right? You don't need to have a huge capital outlay to do some research and to find out what the possible projects are within your organization, right? And then when you get an idea for where the levers can be moved, then I think you can worry about trying to hire up into it. And we've had good luck internally in TripAdvisor because, you know, as we've done wins, right, as we've done projects that have, you know, moved KPIs in various different groups, we've gotten a, you know, better reputation. So people are willing to, you know, work with us to help solve their problems a little bit more. So there's, you know, previous successes kind of grease the wheels in getting you know, in getting buy-in in the organization.
So basically, so you're lucky that you already had a sponsor there, right? So who bought into this vision that this should exist, but in like, and that's I think pretty startup or entrepreneurial problem as well. When you are when you are the visionary, thinking against the culture of the company, right? So how to sort of what are some of your, like, from your entrepreneurial chops, like what are some of the things that I as an executive could do to convince a company? And I think you shed some light of it. Don't start big, just start small and prove the value. What are some of the things?
Like I said, you've got talking in the abstract. Hey, we should get a machine learning group because everybody else in the world has a machine learning group. I think is not the, you know, not the best approach, right? You should say, hey, we should get a machine learning group because I've got this problem that's not being data driven at all. If we can improve predictions in this particular area by X, then this KPI will improve by Y, you know? So, you know, people who run companies are business people. They're not academics. You know, you may think machine learning is awesomely cool, but you always have to put it in the framework of how is this going to help the company? Why should I be spending, you know, the money that I make on this particular approach to do things? And you know, yeah. So I mean, there's companies out there that are obviously counterexamples. There's companies out there that do a lot of research for research's sake. I mean, Google has a huge research organization. But that's not how most companies operate. Most companies have a problem to solve, and their data science or their machine learning groups are there to attack those problems. And it's a very it's an approach based on costs and benefits. You know.
Interesting. So but thank you so much, by the way, for sharing that. I truly appreciate that. So now let's talk about the thought process of putting up a machine learning group. I think that's something that I'm very fascinated about, because this is one, as I said, this is one of the two core cases of why I want to talk to people like you, right? Because we have a lot of people in our community, again, who are given this charter, hey, put up this group, or we have the people who are actually thinking about putting this thing group and they don't know where to start. So you discussed about just like finding the charter, right? So just doing a landscape search on what are the problems that companies are seeing, and then probably putting that up and prioritizing and giving up, hey, this is what I can deliver this year.
The first member of a machine learning group should obviously be somebody very senior, so that you can put together this. You know, there's a lot of times machine learning will be like this magic black box that people picture, where you shove data in and magically the right answer pops out. And a lot of times that's not the case, right? A lot of times there's problems that are very hard in machine learning that people kind of assume that that'll work when in real life it's not really that simple. I recommend if you're starting a machine learning group, hire somebody with a lot of experience so that he can identify those bigger situations and work with your product managers, work with your business stakeholders to try and identify the opportunity. You also need a more senior person right off the bat in order to do the interviewing. There's a lot of, I mean, machine learning is a huge buzzword these days. So it's got a lot of momentum behind it. And sometimes you'll find candidates that are swept up in that momentum without really knowing kind of what they're doing. So you really need somebody on the other end of that phone call to screen your applicants to make sure, yeah, this person could be successful in this field. Because a lot of times, unfortunately, the degree alone just doesn't prepare people enough to do this kind of analytics work. They need to have some real world experience, and they need to show that they can actually solve a real world problem as opposed to do a class exercise. Yeah.
Interesting. I think I'm glad you are sort of. I think that you're covering that area. So I remember about a month back, I got a call from someone in Austin, and she said that she had a dream last night, and God came in a dream that she should be in machine learning. and that's wow. If the gods are getting involved, right? So it's really needed, right? So
it's an amazingly hot buzzword right now, and let's face it, machine learning is really cool. I mean, we're making these computers doing stuff that nobody thought computers could do before, right? And that's kind of like what drives me is that sometimes I'm amazed at what computers are able to come up with on their own. So it is a cool field, and a lot of people are very enamored of it. So
well, it's amazing, and I think so that even started me thinking that how to quantify a good candidate versus, as you said, that there are a lot of people with a lot of passions and may not be like right momentum or direction of where they're heading to, and they in the first 3 sentences of in first 3 seconds they all sound the same, and it's only like when you go to the 10th or 11th hour that you realize, okay, no, like this is probably I could use better help or something. So what are some of your hacks? And I think in finding the right talent, irrespective of machine learning or data science or analytics, like what are some of your that has really worked for you in hiring someone?
Well, I typically look at a resume for junior or senior people. I'll start with junior people. For junior people, I look for a resume where they have exposure to the tools of the trade, right? So that means that they've been actually using their knowledge in practice as opposed to just studying a book, right? And I usually look for some extracurricular activity in the area, right? So in other words, are they interested enough in this field so that they can actually go out and find an internship in the area, right? Because I think a large percentage of the success that people have in a particular chosen area is, do they enjoy it? You know, is this something that you love to do every day, or is this a job where you got to slog through it? If you look for some of that in the resume, that's also interesting too. And then getting them on the phone and talking about various different areas. Luckily, the machine learning field is so huge that you could test somebody's knowledge pretty quickly just by asking a bunch of diverse questions, right? And if they actually have some interest in the field, then they're going to be able to talk about various wildly different use cases for this type of technology because they're interested enough to learn about it, right? Maybe beyond what a class would give them. And then it's application, right? Can you know, by the time I'm done with my phone screen, I'm pretty convinced that a person would be successful. So we don't mind giving them a homework problem to prove it, right? Can you take some dirty data and understand it and make some good inferences out of it? So you see a lot of programming jobs that you need to do some homework for, and it's really no different from a data analyst or from a machine learning job. And the people that you want to hire, as long as you make the problem interesting and with real data, that it's going to be fun for them to do, right? So typically don't have a lot of people balk at doing homework. So
right. Yeah, that's true. So now let's talk about KPIs. I think you raised an interesting point on having KPIs to measure what the hell you are doing.
Right.
So for something like machine learning group, when you're thinking about and not getting specific to what TripAdvisor does, but as on a very very generic term. So if you're putting up a machine learning group or data science group or data analytics group, what are some of the KPIs?
I won't get specific because I don't think that's a problem.
That will be really helpful.
The thing about KPIs is they're not specific to machine learning, like I said before, right?
Yeah.
As with any group, you're trying to move a business needle, and the KPIs are associated with the business, not associated with the technology that's underneath. Now, you can use other metrics to try and judge whether you're going to be successful on moving the KPIs. Like, for example, when we build models, we will measure them against an offline data set for accuracy or some other metric to judge whether we think it's going to do better than something that's currently in place. Otherwise, there's no real, if you can't do better in offline predictions, there's no real evidence that you do better in online predictions, so there's no use rolling it out.
That's true.
So we'll use, map or, precision recall curve or area in the curve type stuff to measure our internal metrics to judge on how we think we'll be able to move the KPIs. But the KPIs are another matter altogether, right? KPIs are something like click-through rate for listings or search. We made up this one called search success, which is if you go to a TripAdvisor search box and you wind up in a particular location, that's a success. If you don't get to something and just bounce off it, that's not a success. And we were able to increase that by like 30% last year. So nice. I mean, you need KPIs are not specific to machine learning or data science. They are specific to the business. Revenue is a big one, right? A lot of times with my particular group, we will be trying to increase engagement without hurting revenue, right? So there's two dimensions, right? So we want to make sure that our users are finding the site more useful, getting to the information that they want faster, but we can't hurt revenue at the same time, right?
Interesting. And I think one thing that I have seen a lot, and that's particularly specific with big companies, that there's a lot of existence of shadow functions and shadow groups, right? So a micro IT group or micro machine learning group within a particular business unit doing certain things, right? Now there's some sort of merit to it, that okay, those businesses have real use cases that they're trying to work and all that, right? But machine learning is such a beautiful thing of like sometimes discovery, right? Discovering innovation, and even in the area that I'm passionate about, innovation, there's something called bottom-up innovation, which is like understanding customer behavior and then saying, okay, maybe this guy, like we have many customers who prefer A versus B, so let's invest in A, right? That's a very machine learning able innovation, right? So there's a lot of use case on why say a corporate of that big company should have a machine learning group or something, like at least the data science group or center of excellence, whatever you want to call it, right? Yeah. So you can have different name to it. So now you said that beautifully that there are KPIs for businesses, that's something like a machine learning group cater to. But for relevance of should the machine learning group exist, does the group needs to have its own KPIs that, hey, if I'm producing blah blah blah, then I'm keeping myself busy enough that I should be in the business of being a group in this company?
So we actually, because we work across a bunch of different areas, we concentrate a lot in this one area right now, but we do work across a whole bunch of different areas. And to say that we don't have one particular KPI that our group follows. What we're judged on is, can we increase the KPIs of groups that we work with, right?
Interesting.
So we have A/B tests running across a bunch of different groups in the company as we speak, and they will be trying to optimize different KPIs. So it's a little bit difficult to measure the performance of the group using when you're spread across a bunch of different areas like this. It's difficult to measure it as one factor, but we just leverage off of what other people are trying to accomplish.
Interesting, and beautiful. So now let's dig a bit deeper in your personal experience. Like, so if you can shed maybe 1, 2, 3 things that has attributed to your success. Like what are some of the areas that made you what you are, and sort of if you can shed some light.
Okay. I said before that I think a large percentage of somebody's success is, do you like what you're doing, right? And
That's true.
I've always liked this stuff. I got my first professional programming job when I was 11 years old,
Nice.
writing accounting software on IBM 5100, and I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. And I've loved doing this for, well, it's now almost 40 years. working in computers, yeah. And you don't have to start as young as I do, but enjoy what you do, right? So if you're going to build a career on something, it helps a lot if you get up, at the beginning of the day and are excited to get to work. Work hard, right? We've put a lot of hours in, especially in the startup. The startups require a lot of time. There was a point in Optimax when I was working 80 hours a week, which was necessary to get the product out the door. But you got to be able to put your nose to the grindstone and go do that. 3. So kind of think of another one.
Well, that's fine. That's fine. So, thank you so much for sharing that, by the way. So, I think one more area that I hear a lot, and I definitely want to have your perspective on. So, we talk to a lot of interesting leaders in data science space, and many times I've seen like one stark sort of similarity in those candidates. So it's the mix of their art and science passion. So they are nerd and they have some artistic. I think you showed that you have a professional photography as one of your interests. I know a guy who for every month he used left hand and then the right hand for doing things. It's like he's a freak show, but definitely he gets the job done. And then I know guy who plays guitar in rock, and then guy plays saxophone. So how does that help? Or is this something that you recommend, that having an
okay, it helps that I'm able to get free tickets to rock shows. Yeah.
That's a great idea.
I don't know. I find hobbies are a useful outlet. In addition to that, I play poker a lot. I'm not too bad at it. My friends may contradict me on that, but it's fun. Fortunately, I've been very lucky in my life, and at this point, I'm able to do things pretty much that I find fun. Doing the machine learning thing at TripAdvisor is a lot of fun, but so is concert photography. So do that too. I don't think there's any real deeper meaning on that. It's just that people will have different interests, and it's good to be multifaceted sometimes, so that you're not all one track pony. But I don't think there's any other. I don't have any other explanation for why I do what I do, and that it's kind of fun.
So, thank you for sharing that. By the way, I think one area that I definitely find interesting on. So, compared to old days, so there is a model you have to work on this. It's a very waterfall model. It'll take a while to get developed in water, right? So there's a one consistent track, you're following it. Now we see like the entire company is running on ADHD or whatever you call it, right? So it's a lot of micro problems in a very appified manner, and sort of very self-contained and self-sustainable sort of system. Is it solving, or like what's your reaction to the two ecosystem? Like, is it good for the good or for the worst?
You don't really do waterfall at TripAdvisor, right? So one of the great things about working at a company that has as much reach as we do is that we have a ton of web traffic, right? Somebody once told me it was like 2 terabytes a day of web logs. Right? Oh, yeah. So that's insane, right? So if you go away and build a model for 6 months, and then the first time you test it 6 months out, you don't have a lot of learning going on there, right? So typically what we do is we will build projects in a much shorter time frame, and luckily we have the resource with which to test our ideas, right? So you stick something up on the site, and you're going to get significance within a week of whether your hypothesis was correct or not, right? So using that fire hose of data, you can inform yourself about your customers and your product and iterate much faster. And if you're not doing that, then you're really throwing away a huge resource to guide your thinking. Yeah.
Interesting. So personally, is this something that you prefer? Like compare. So having a very agile or very sort of agility delivery framework versus very sort of I know waterfall is not the right word now anyway, but I think like a more long spanned delivery cycle. So do you have any preference?
So let me give you an example. If you ever go to a TripAdvisor webpage and you want to find all the romantic hotels or all the family friendly restaurants or all the adventurous things to do, those are all machine learning models underneath there, right? They're basically semi-supervised logistic regressions that we train on the review text and metadata about the property and user voting and a whole bunch of different stuff that we use to make these calls on the site. That was a long project, right? That easily took 6 or 7 months to get out. However, what we did first to test our hypothesis was we built a very simple system on top of that. So the current system collects votes off the site, feeds them into the models, trains the models, makes these inferences, and then use the output of those models to do active learning on the site to collect more votes. What we did as a first pass is we just, created a big mechanical Turk data set, and paid for the data, right? So we were able to test our hypothesis that yes, based on review text, you can make reasonable calls about the properties of a particular location in the TripAdvisor database, and we were able to test our hypothesis with a much smaller level project than rolling out the whole thing. Now, once you identify that, then go ahead and build the big project. But if you can verify it at a lower cost, and quicker, well then, do that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I think that brings me to an interesting question here. So if you can share, so what are some of the machine learning use cases that TripAdvisor use? If you can shed some light.
Oh my God, there's lots of them. So I just talked about the tagging. We've got about 400 different models now across the millions of properties and the 500 million reviews, all running on Apache Spark. So there's a huge big data problem there, in addition to the machine learning problem. We do a lot of unsupervised natural language processing. So if you ever go to a TripAdvisor webpage and you look at the top of the reviews, you'll see this keyword cloud that we do the phrase identification and also look for phrases that are overly represented in particular locations, so that you know what people are talking about when they look at a particular location. We do a lot of clustering. So if you go into the Boston things to do, for example, you'll see things like Colonial Boston. That's actually all machine learning driven. That's not a human putting those things together. That's a machine putting those together. If you the search result ranking, we do learn to rank models a lot in those areas, and I told you how we improved the search success rate. We also do natural language understanding. So when you type in hotels in Boston in the search box, you actually get hotels in Boston, as opposed to just throwing those 3 words up against Elasticsearch and seeing what will come out. We do review fraud detection. I can't really talk about that because of the whole black hat, white hat nature of the thing. Personalization is a big push right now. So you'll notice that the TripAdvisor homepage is getting a lot more personalized to what you've been browsing in the past. And we're pushing that. That's a big push that we're working on right now. A lot of ranking, so make sure people find the correct things that they want as soon as they can. That will lower the friction and increase a lot of important metrics. What else? Machine vision we're starting to get into right now. So we'll have a blog post coming out about that in a week or two.
Nice.
But we're using some deep learning networks to automatically categorize and sort the photos that people submit. There's a lot of photos that people submit. Some are not as good as others. So it's amazing what deep learning is doing for machine vision. It constantly surprises me how well that works. Given my previous experience in non-deep learning machine vision, which kind of stunk. Those are a pretty broad a variety of problems that we're working on right now. So.
Interesting. And I think one area that definitely I want your personal opinion on, and I think this is, since you are from machine learning domain, so you probably would be able to give a good perspective. So I was in a conversation with bunch of pharmaceutical guys from pharmaceutical background, and we're talking about machine learning and sort of discovering. They spend a lot of money in sort of drug discovery, and we know like how much drugs are expensive and all that, right? So if they can use the clinical trial and like we just went into the direction, and so one of the things that I heard in the conversation was they're terrified with what the area that they could find that they don't want to find, right? So those aspects of, hey, machine learning, so it has no respect, right? So it just goes and try to pull out patterns and whatever, right? And sometimes you don't want to know things that you want to know. So luckily, TripAdvisor is not that company, right? So these companies are based on
I don't know why you would ever want to stick your head in the sand about anything. So
right, exactly. So what's your thought with, like, because these companies are pretty much like they can really use machine learning to get somewhere, but the very nature of, hey, I might step on something that it's like I'm more than happy not knowing certain things that I somewhat know.
I don't know that I'm the right guy to help anybody that says I don't want to know something. Data is data, and if you uncover a pattern and it's not pleasant, that doesn't mean you shouldn't know about it, right? There's a huge gender bias in the Word2Vec data that Google generates, because there's a gender bias in the text that you see on the web. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't know about it, because I can subtract it out once I know about it, right? I'd like to know what they're afraid of learning, because I can't really see how that would be a bad thing.
Yes, I think that's good to know, by the way. So we are almost at the tail end of the conversation, by the way, Jeff, and it's really pleasure having a good conversation with you. So do you have any favorite read you want to share with our audience?
Favorite reading? You mean technical reading or just reading?
Doesn't matter. Like your favorite reading. It could be a photography manual. I don't care.
Huge science fiction buff. I love. I just suck this stuff down. If you're looking for a good science fiction author, check out Werner Vinge. A lot of his work is I'm a big fan of. Stephen Baxter's good too. I like the science fiction novels that actually are huge in scope, right? Mm. So a lot of Baxter stuff goes from the beginning of the universe to the heat death of the universe. And I always thought that was kind of a cool idea. That you could have a novel that actually spans billions and hundreds of billions of years. Makes you feel small, but what can you do?
Oh yes, that's true. Data makes you feel. Yes, I agree with you. So again, Jeff, it's a pleasure conversing with you. Before we part ways, love to know your closing remark for our audience.
Closing remark. I think that the machine learning field has a lot of buzz right now, but I think that it's rightly so. We're making huge advances using these techniques in terms of improving business at TripAdvisor, and people are doing it all over the place. This stuff is actually working this time around. We talked about how back in the 80s. There was a big disappointment when it turned out not to pan out, but it's panning out now. We're having some pretty good success in applying stuff, and I think it's because of all the data that's available these days. And with technologies like Hadoop is not only available but is easily manipulated. So I think that there's a lot of buzz in the industry right now. But it's well founded, and if you're going into it, work hard, and I think there's a great career doing this stuff for the foreseeable future.
Well said, Jeff. And I think with that, that brings to our conclusion of the session. Thank you so much, Jeff, for being very candid and sharing your perspective with our audience. Love to have you back some point discussing how your group is coming along, and sharing some of other insights that you have discovered or uncovered. And again, I do appreciate you spending time with our community.
Yeah, it was great talking to you too. Thanks.
I thought I was sick of home, but actually I was homesick. Never really knew that I would have to grow up so quick. I'm so uncomfortable, don't know anybody here. Just a couple dudes that I met once, that's it. And I go into the booth feeling nervous. Got butterflies in my stomach like I'm so worthless. Is the mic on? I don't know how to work this. Inside I'm breaking down, I hope I'm not up on a